Hello everyone and welcome back to the world of finance. In the earlier classes, in this sequence that we were following, we have started discussing about forward rates and forward rate agreement FRA. In the earlier couple of classes, we have mainly dealt with the long-term contracts, correct? And mainly focusing on determining the forward rates, what we call as implied forward rate. Now, we are going to focus on the short-term FRA rate, how to determine short-term FRA rate, and more importantly in this class we are going to also talk about the speculative FRA, that is that type of forward rate agreement which are primarily designed with speculative intent. Now, I will do one thing. Whatever logical background you have learned in the earlier classes about the long-term forward rates, similar logic we are going to apply over here. Of course, between the long-term FRA rate and short-term FRA rate, when it comes to the computation, there will be a slight difference here and there, but the logic of computation will never change. That is why if you don't go by formula based approach and go logically, you will never have trouble in understanding the point. So let's directly begin with an example over here. Look at this. Consider the following. Now you might be wondering why example 8 directly, because this is a follow-up class, correct? This is a third part what you are dealing within this segment FRA. So in the earlier classes I have covered those earlier 7 examples. Now it's a follow-up. So example number 8 begins with this data. It says consider the following. 6 months MRR is 11.2% per annum. 12-month MRR is 12.2% per annum. What should be 6-month FRA rate 6-month forward? That is by notation it is 6/12 FRA. Now few things let me explain through this example itself. Notice the first difference. The borrowing period over here has now got reduced to just 6 months. So earlier it was borrowing period in certain number of years. You will now find borrowing rate expressed in terms of certain number of days, weeks or months. That means the borrowing period is shorter than 1 year. That is why this comes under the short-term FRA category. So, other thing that you will come across is the manner in which you express the FRA rate. Remember earlier, suppose it was a forward rate starting after 2 years for a period of 3 years, we used to write small f 2,3. But here, first of all, it will be in months and days, and if it is a 6-month FRA rate 6-month forward, means after 6 months the borrowing will initiate and the borrowing will be for a period of 6 months. So if you draw a timeline, start with 0, that is now. First 6 months will be the waiting period, that will be the first time stamp, that is 6 month, and then 6 months later, I mean 6 months from there will be your borrowing period. So 6 plus 6, 12 months is your overall period. That is why it is mentioned as 6/12 FRA. The loan initiate after 6 months and loan terminate after 12 months. If the loan starts after 6 months and terminates at 12 months, the loan duration will be 6 months. That is from the end of 6 months to end of 12 months, the duration will be 6 months. Now, we always formally mention in this format for short-term FRA 6/12 FRA, indicating that the loan initiates in 6 months, loan terminates in 12 months. That means loan will be for a period of 6 months. In other words, it is 6 months FRA rate 6 month forward. Now how do we determine this? Very simple, very logical. Let me explain this through three different approaches. Now I'll explain to you these three approaches and you can follow whichever you like the most. But learning it for the first time, I will recommend that you note down all the three approaches. Let's assume that you borrowed $10,000 now and you have borrowed for 6 months. So 6 months MRR. MRR stands for market reference rate, correct? So 6 months MRR is 11.2%. Rate is always per annum, but it is applicable for a 6-month borrowing. So how much will be the maturity value at the end of 6 months? Very simple. What I'll say is, if 11.2% is an annualized rate, the periodic rate for 6 months will be 11.2% into 6 by 12, basically half of 11.2%. Without of 11.2 is nothing but 5.6. So I will simply add 5.6% to $10,000 and I'll get the maturity value after 6 months. 5.6% added to the initial principal of $10,000, the maturity value at 6 months will become 10,560. However, if I would have borrowed same sum, $10,000 now, but for a period of 12 months, the applicable rate would have been 12.2%. In that case, the maturity value after 12 months would go to $11,220. Simply 12.2% added to $10,000, 11,220 is the maturity value. So now in a timeline, we have 3 time stamps: 0, 6 month, 12 month. At 0, it is what? At 0, it is $10,000. At 6 month, it is $10,560, and at 12 month, it is $11,220. Now, I want to find what will be the applicable rate from 6 month end to 12 month end. That means whatever was $10,560 is becoming $11,220 in the 6 months time. So let me write that. After 6 months, what was $10,560 is going to become $11,220. I will want you to not miss out this logic. Once again, at the initial point, that is at 0 date, the value is $10,000. At 6 months time, it is $10,560. At 12 months time, it is $11,220. So we know what is the rate from 0 to 6 month. We also know what is the rate from 0 to 12 months. But we don't know what is the rate from 6 month end to 12 month end. That is what we call as 6 by 12 FRA. So 6 month to 12 month, 6 by 12 FRA. It is basically a rate applicable for 6 months. So we will first find the periodic rate. What you have to do is a very, very simple task. Logically, this is becoming this much. That is 10,560 is becoming 11,220 in 6 months time. So what is the rate of return? Simply compute the 6 month periodic rate by taking 11,220 minus 10,560 divided by 10,560. You know what we follow as P1 minus P0 divided by P0. But whatever you get will not be the annualized rate. It will be the rate of return for 6 month or the borrowing rate for 6 month. So periodic rate for 6 month is coming to 6.25%. If this is 6.25%, 6 by 12 FRA, when you have to annualize, you do the same thing but multiply the time factor of 12 by 6, because this is applicable for 6 months. What will be for 12 months? It will be twice of 6.25%, that is 12.5%. So 6.25% is the periodic rate for 6 months, and 6 by 12 FRA rate, which you have to answer as the final outcome, will always be the annualized rate. Don't forget, rate of interest is always quoted on per annum basis. Do not forget that. So the annualized 6 by 12 FRA rate will be 12.5% per annum. Now let me give you a chance to note down this whole thing and then we proceed ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this whole thing, now let me explain the later part. I'll explain yet another approach. In fact, recall what we have learnt in the earlier part of FRA when we dealt with long-term FRA. You remember we dealt with a forward rate model and I explained to you, always take the bigger factor divided by the smaller factor. So over here, look at this. 11.2% was annualized rate, but applicable for 6 months. So we converted this into a periodic rate. I told you take half of 11.2%. So the rate became 5.6%. So that periodic factor will be 1 plus the periodic rate. So periodic factor will be 1.056. This is a 12-month period, so 12.2% per annum remains 12.2%. It doesn't change because the period itself is 12 month. Period is the entire year. So the periodic rate of this remains 12.2%. So the factor will be 1.122, correct? 1 plus 12.2% is 1.122. Bigger factor divided by smaller factor. So if you want, you can pick your calculator and make the calculation. Bigger factor 1.122 divided by smaller factor, that is 1.056. What I am getting is 1.0625. Subtract 1 and you get 0.0625 directly. This is that 6.25% periodic rate. That periodic rate you annualize by multiplying 12 by 6, you get 12.5%. It is that simple. If you can understand that quick approach, but this is the base logic that I want you to drill into your minds. But not to forget, we will now also use the logic that we have learnt in the forward rate model, particularly while dealing with the long-term FRA rates. So let me explain that as well. So what do you do? The rate for 6 month means the 6 month borrowing rate we are converting into periodic rate. It comes to 5.6% as periodic rate, and 12 month rate remains 12.2% because the period itself is 12 months. Now what we do? We take the factors. So factors will be 1 plus the periodic rate. So bigger factor divided by smaller factor minus 1. So bigger factor 1.122 divided by smaller factor 1.056 minus 1. Now what was the complication in long-term FRA? That factor sometimes used to be for 2 years, 3 years. So when you divide this, before subtracting 1, you have to make sure that the factor is annualized, and for that, if it was a 2-year factor, you had to take the square root. If it was a 3-year factor, you had to take the cube root. Here you don't have to do any such thing because nothing is going beyond 1 year period. Everything is under 1 year. In fact, this periodic rate what you will get will be for a period shorter than 1 year because it's a 6 month case. So bigger factor divided by smaller factor minus 1. So unannualized rate is coming to 6.25%. Annualize that by multiplying the factor 12 by 6 and you get the per annum rate as 12.5%. It is that simple. So please take note of this as well, and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed that, let me now introduce yet another approach. That other approach is purely a formula based approach. Some people may like it, some may not. Those who don't like that formula based approach, because honestly even I don't like, but because it is given in certain textbooks, and I have noticed in my past that some students somehow prefer that. So my task is to explain to you all the approaches At your choice, you may decide to follow whichever approach you want. Questions in exam cannot emphasize which method or which formula you need to apply, right? So you are at your free will to decide what formula you need to use, or whether you want to use any formula or go directly with this kind of logic. So I am explaining to you the third approach, which is purely formula based approach. So if you don't like it, discard it, but at least once you try to understand that as well. Here in this case, you directly compute the FRA rate, and the formula goes this way: R2 into T2. Same thing, R2 is the rate for longer period, R1 is the rate for shorter period. T1 is the shorter period and T2 is the longer period. So rate of long period will be obviously multiplied to the long period, rate of short period will be multiplied to the short period. So you take the product of rate into time. You know, we simply do what? We take the principal into rate into time for computing the interest, correct? P into R into T, principal into rate into time. So rate into time for longer period minus rate into time for shorter period will give you the adjusted difference, that is the periodic adjusted difference. That will be divided by 1 plus R1 into T1. That means 1 plus the shorter period rate multiplied by difference between the longer period and shorter period. But keep in mind one thing, all this period what I am expressing as T1, T2 should be the time in years. That means if the question is giving you months or days, convert everything into years. Then only this formula will work. Don't consider this as 12 minus 6. It's basically 12 by 12 minus 6 by 12. So 12 by 12 is 1. 6 by 12 is 0.5. So when you take T2 minus T1, it will be 1 minus 0.5. Just that precaution you take and you will be getting the computation directly. So look at this, the R2 and T2. T2 was 1 year, entire 1 year. R2 was 12.2%, so 0.122. R1 was 11.2%, so 0.112. And T1 was 6 months, so 6 by 12 means it is 0.5. This is 1 plus the time adjusted factor for the short period and multiplied by difference between the long period and short period. When you do this math, when you do this calculation, what you will directly get is the annualized FRA rate directly. So I told you, don't have a closed mind, keep an open mind and look into whether this formula based approach is suiting you or not. If it doesn't suit you, discard it anyway, because we have learned logically how to compute this. So quickly take note of this and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed this, let us move ahead and take up yet another example. Example number 9. This says 3-month MRR is 11.2% and 6-month MRR is 12%. What should be 3-month FRA rate 3 months forward? So now you are going to borrow money after 3 months for a period of 3 months. So by notation, it is always mentioned as 3 by 6 FRA. So at 3 month your loan starts, at 6 month your loan terminates. So same way you have to solve it, and for your reference I am going to give you all the 3 approaches of attempting this calculation, and we start with the first one where we would say $10,000 borrowed now for a period of 3 months at 11.2%. Just compute the interest and add it. So 11.2% is a per annum rate, so applicable for 3 months. So how much will be the interest? $10,000 into 11.2% into 3 by 12. That interest comes to $280. $280 added to $10,000. $10,000, 280 becomes the maturity value in 3 months time. But if you would have borrowed the same sum for 6 months, applicable rate is 12% per annum. So that will be converted into periodic rate of 6%, correct? 12% for 12 months. So how much for 6 months? 6%. Here there is no compounding because it is everything under 1 year. Now the maturity value of course comes to 10,600. Again, imagine a timeline with 3 timestamps: 0, 3 month and 6 month. At 0 the value is $10,000, at 3 month the value is $10,280, and at 6 month the value is $10,600. So if there is an amount after 3 months as 10,280, in the next 3 months it should become $10,600. So what you need to do, you need to find that rate. That rate is nothing but 3/6 FRA rate, because it starts at 3 month and ends at 6 month. So 3 month periodic rate will be 10,600 minus 10,280 divided by 10,280. You want the result in percentage, multiply by 100, it comes to 3.1128%. This is a periodic rate for 3 months. So what will be the annualized rate? Simple thing, just multiply the time factor, that is 12 by 3, and you get the annualized rate as 12.45%. So without making any delay, quickly take note of this whole thing and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed this, let me show you the same calculation through the other way. Now the other way, you have 3 month rate and 6 month rate. Both are annualized rates. So convert both of these into periodic rates. So 1 plus the 6 month periodic rate becomes the bigger factor. 1 plus the 3 month periodic rate will become the smaller factor. Then what you do? Bigger factor divided by smaller factor minus 1 will give you the periodic rate for your FRA contract, and convert that into per annum by annualizing it. So your case over here is 3/6 FRA, means your borrowing is effectively going to be for 3 months. So your FRA periodic rate will be a 3 month rate, that is to be annualized by taking the time factor as 12 by 3, and you get everything sorted in one go. So let me show you that type of calculation over here. So the 3 month periodic rate will be 11.2% into 3 by 12, that comes to 2.8%. 6 month periodic rate will be 12% into 6 by 12, that comes to 6%. So now you convert these into factors. So 1 plus the 6 month rate divided by 1 plus the 3 month rate, that is bigger factor, divided by smaller factor. So 1.06 divided by 1.028, from that you subtract 1 and you get 3/6 FRA rate, which is unannualized as 3.1128%. And now simply multiply the time factor for adjustment into annualization as 12 by 3, and you get the annualized rate as 12.45%. So please write up this as well, and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, now in case you wanted to follow that straight formula which I have explained to you earlier, if at all you want to follow this formula, it will give you the annualized FRA rate directly, which is coming to 12.45% per annum. If you don't want to follow this, you can skip this part. If you want to follow this, you can take note of this and then move ahead. Alright friends, I'm sure you have completed this. Now what we will do, I would want you to take it as a test upon yourself. Are you able to apply this concept in the upcoming next question? If you are able to apply that, fantastic. If you are not able to apply, once again I'll guide you. So the moment I display the next example on screen, you are supposed to take maximum 3 minutes time and solve it. In fact, 3 minutes is also too much. I would say just 2 minutes time and solve it. And you are at your free will to follow any of the 3 approaches that you have learnt. There is no need to follow all 3. Any one is fine. But your accuracy of calculation is being tested. So keep in mind that I'm watching you. Just do the calculation rightfully. So the moment I display the question, the timer begins. I'll give you exactly 2 minutes to solve, and your time starts now. Alright friends, 2 minutes time is over. Let us check whether you got things correct or not. If you have followed this approach, $10,000 in 1 month will become 10,033.33. $10,000 in 4 months will become 10,166.67. So what is after 3 months as 10,033.33 should become in the next 3 months 10,166.67. So the periodic rate will be, or directly annualized rate if you want to find. See, if you are multiplying this 12 by 3, you directly get the annualized rate. If you don't multiply 12 by 3, you will be getting the periodic rate. So if you want to find periodic rate, use this part only, avoid this time factor. But most cases, question is silent, you will always take it as annualized rate. And when you apply this whole calculation, 1 by 4 FRA rate is effectively the rate for 3 months. That is why for annualization the factor is 12 by 3. So the answer is 5.32% per annum. So please make sure that you have got this correct. In case you want to note it down, please write it quickly and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed this whole thing, let us move ahead, and now we follow the other approach. We take the periodic rate for the 30 days MRR. We take the periodic rate for 120 days MRR, and then what we do, we take the bigger factor divided by the smaller factor minus 1. So when you do that calculation, the bigger factor divided by smaller factor minus 1, you'll be getting the periodic rate, and then when you go for annualization, you multiply 12 by 3 or 360 by 90. Both will not make any difference because you are dealing with short term rates which are applicable in money market. And what happens in money market, we generally follow the convention of 30 by 360. 30 by 360 convention, you know what does it mean? It means that we assume that there are 30 days in a month and there are 360 days in a year. So every month will be considered equivalent to 30 days and a year will always be taken as 360 days. The other convention, actual by actual convention, is mainly used in bond market and derivative market, but in money market we always try to follow the 30 by 360 convention unless the question informs you otherwise. So in case you have yet to write it down, quickly note it down and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed this, let me show you this formula based calculation in case you are interested. I have been telling you, if you are not interested in this approach, you can discard it. I don't mind at all. But if you want to follow this, you will be still getting the same result what you got by other methods. So in case you are interested, you note it down, else we can move ahead. Alright, let me once again take you for a round of test. I'll give you 2 minutes to crack this. Your time starts now. Alright, the given time is over and let's see what you got is correct or not. I will not say a word over here. You know how to deal with these calculations. Just in case you did not go correct, here is the guidance provided to you. The correct answer in this case, that is the 1 by 4 FRA rate that is annualized, should come to 8.285% per annum. Take note of this whole thing and then we move ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed this, time for us to move ahead and now deal with the next very important segment, that is speculative FRA. Now this is going to be a very important aspect to connect between FRA and swaps. So when we start learning the topic swaps, you'll be finding a swap is defined as a chain of various FRAs. Means multiple FRAs lined up, the group or the chain of that FRA is actually a swap. But where does FRA and swap differ? We will deal with that as well. But right now, let us not bring swap into picture. Let us first focus on FRA, speculative FRA. So, what exactly is speculation with respect to FRA? Let's say you believe that interest rates are going to shoot up. So you don't want to miss out on that opportunity. You enter into an FRA, that is a forward rate agreement. You enter into FRA to borrow money at the contracted FRA rate, which is, as per your estimates, still a lower rate. The real reference rate will be higher when the time comes. In that case, you will end up saving some interest. Now, actually, when it is a speculative FRA, you don't want to actually borrow or lend money. The two parties, one having expectation or sentiments that the interest rates will go up, another counterparty having the sentiments the other way, they enter into FRA with an understanding that they will settle the difference at the fixation date. Whenever the date arrives, they will settle that difference in cash. Actual borrowing and lending will never happen. So the objective is not to borrow, not to lend, but to make speculative gains. And of course, in case the market doesn't move in your favor, you may end up having losses also. So it's a speculation, right? So speculation, you want to make a gain, but if it doesn't move the way you want, you can suffer with losses. Now, what happens when you expect that interest rates are going to rise? So imagine I believe that interest rates are going to rise. So I will say that after 3 months I would want to borrow from you. What rate would you offer? Suppose you offer me 10% rate, and I say okay, seal deal. Means I would want to borrow at 10% after 3 months, because I know that after 3 months the market reference rate is still going to be higher, but you believe that that rate will be lower. Now there may be 3 possible outcomes. When we land up at the date after 3 months, the market reference rate is exactly 10%, is above 10%, or is below 10%. If it is exactly 10%, then 10% is the rate at which I agreed to borrow, 10% is the prevailing rate, difference is 0. So nobody makes any settlement to the other one. But if the interest rates have risen, that means the market reference rate has risen, then after 3 months I will be at an advantage, because I have agreed to borrow at 10% and say the prevailing rate is 11%, then I am saving interest of that 1%. We will fix up a notional principle. On that you apply that 1% difference, convert that into present value and settle the payment. Basically, why present value and all, I am coming to that part when we discuss with calculative examples, but the idea is very clear. Get the intuition very clearly that the initial part of our calculation is going to be savings of interest or incurring excess interest. Saving of interest is a gain for me, incurring excess interest is a loss for me. So that will happen whenever the market reference rate is lower than or higher than the FRA rate. So I was expecting the interest rates to rise. So if MRR is greater than FRA, I will be making gains. If it happens the other way, I will incur a loss. Now here one thing that you need to understand. I'll give you notes as well. But when we say FRA and say you come to a point theoretically mentioned in lot of contents in textbooks that someone bought an FRA. What does buying an FRA mean? Buying an FRA means agreeing to borrow at FRA rate. So if you are buying the FRA, somebody is selling the FRA. That means you buying the FRA indicating that you are agreeing to borrow at the FRA rate. The counterparty has agreed to lend at FRA rate. If the interest rate rises, the borrower or the buyer of FRA gains, because whoever has taken a long FRA means buyer of FRA, will gain if the interest rates rise. Correct? Will lose if the interest rate will fall. Likewise, someone who has sold FRA, who has taken short position in FRA, means that person has not agreed to borrow but agreed to lend at FRA rate. If the interest rates rise, the person taking short position will make a loss. If the interest rates fall, the person taking short position will make a gain. This is what we have to actually learn. And when it comes to calculations, if you understand the concept, the calculations are extremely simple. But if you try to deal with this mechanically, you will get stuck. So let us first discuss some important issues over here. We have taken a scenario where you expect that interest rate will rise up in coming 3 months and want to take advantage of this rising interest rate. For this purpose, you should buy FRA contract. So buying an FRA contract that will be effective after 3 months from now. Now I have already explained to you, buying an FRA means what? Agreeing to borrow at the FRA rate. Why are you willing to borrow at FRA rate? Because you believe that the actual interest rate after 3 months will still be higher. So I have given that line, buying FRA would imply that you agree to borrow at FRA rate. Do one thing, first write up this much and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed writing this much, let us move ahead. And here we take the next follow-up example. Now this example, it has a lot of content and I would want you to write this in your notebook, sir. It says, assume that you wish to borrow rupees 1 lakh after 3 months for a period of 6 months. So you want to borrow after 3 months for a period of 6 months. So it is basically a 3/9 FRA. Okay. FRA contract will allow you to borrow at contracted FRA rate irrespective of the interest rate prevailing after 3 months. So interest rate that will prevail after 3 months will be the MRR, that is market reference rate. 6 month FRA rate at 3 month forward, that is 3/9 FRA rate, is quoted by the bank at 12%. That means a bank has quoted this rate. That means bank is selling FRA and you are buying this FRA. Assume that after 3 months the interest rate prevailing in the market, that is the market reference rate, is given as 13.2%. Determine the amount of gain made by buying this FRA. So I want you to note down this example because it conveys a lot of meaningful content, not just an example. So please take note of this whole thing and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, now that you have written this whole thing, let me give you the required explanation, which is very, very important. You believe that interest rates will rise. So you have agreed to borrow at the FRA rate. FRA rate in this example is given as 12%. You have agreed to borrow after 3 months for a period of 6 months at the agreed FRA rate of 12% per annum, and the notional principal is rupees 1 lakh. Now, what will be the interest that you would have paid had you not entered into this FRA? And what is the interest rate that you will actually pay if you are buying this FRA? We are going to compute interest. So very simple. I don't even need calculator to make this simple calculation. I will simply say 1 lakh rupee is the notional principal. Suppose you would not have entered into this FRA. Then You would have borrowed at whatever rate is prevailing in the market, which is given as 13.2% per annum. 13.2% is the annualized rate. You want to borrow only for 6 months. So first of all, determine the periodic rate. So periodic rate will be 6 by 12 of 13.2%, means half of 13.2%, that is 6.6%. So amount of borrowing is rupees what? 1 lakh, that is the notional principal. You want to find 6.6% of that. 6.6% of that will be what? 6,600. Correct? Now, because you have entered into FRA rate, you will be eligible to borrow at 12%. Means you will never pay 6.6% for that period. You will pay half of 12%, that is only 6%. So as per your annualized FRA rate of 12%, the periodic rate, that is the 6-month periodic rate, will be only 6%. So 6% of 1 lakh, that will be just 6,000. So you agreed to borrow at 12% per annum, but prevailing rate is higher. So effectively you have saved some interest. So what interest you would have paid if there was no FRA? 6,600. How much interest you would actually pay because of this FRA? 6,000. So what is the difference of interest that you have saved? That is rupees 600. Now logically, interest will accrue only at the end of the period, right? So when the borrowing terminates, it is that time when you have saved that 600. But what happens if we draw a timeline? 0, then 3 month and 9 month. So 0 is the date of FRA. 3 month is basically the fixation date. That is the date on which the interest rate is fixed. Why I am saying interest rate is fixed? Because we are dealing with MRR, market reference rate. Market reference rate changes every moment. Keep in mind one thing. Within a day also the rates change multiple times. So you are going to talk about an interest rate that will apply for the next 6 months. So market interest rate or market reference rate continuously keeps changing. You want to fix that at one point. That point of fixation is the fixation date. So the rate that prevailed at the fixation date was 13.2%. So you would want to freeze that 13.2% for the next 6 months. But you have agreed to borrow at 12%. So effectively 13.2 minus 12, you have saved 1.2%. 1.2% is a annualized rate. So periodic saving will be half of 1.2, that is 0.6%. So you have effectively saved 0.6%. That 0.6% applied on the notional principal of rupees 1 lakh will give you savings of rupees 600. But keep in mind one thing. When will this saving arise? When the loan period has terminated, means at 9th month. At 9th month, because in the timeline we plotted what? 0, 3 month and 9 month. At 9 month you are supposed to be saving interest of 600. So your benefit value at 9 month is 600. But why should you wait for that period from 3 months to 9 months when you already know that you have made a gain of 600? So what we do, we find the present value of that 600 and that becomes a settlement amount. That amount is settled. Let me show you this by calculation over here. Please carefully take note of this entire matter. This is very, very important. So after 3 months, you have agreed to borrow rupees 1 lakh for the next 6 months at 12%. This is as per your FRA rate. After 3 months, if you borrow 1 lakh with the prevailing rate, you would have paid interest of 6,600. So the future value with your FRA rate is becoming 1,06,000. with the market reference rate is becoming 1,06,600. What is the difference between these two values? Is the amount of interest that you have saved. So resulting gain on termination, that is after 6 months. Keep in mind one thing. This is the point of 0. After 3 months you are borrowing now. So this is the point which is 3 months. But from here it is the next 6 months. That means this saving is arising at 9th month, but you would want to settle it at 3rd month. That means at 3 months if you are trying to settle, you cannot settle 600. You'll have to bring down this 600 to its present value. The question is, what should be the discounting rate to bring down that 600 to its present value? What should be the discounting rate? Discounting rate cannot be your FRA rate. Discounting rate is always the rate that is prevailing in the market, and the rate prevailing in the market is the MRR of 13.2%. Again, convert that into a periodic rate. Periodic rate for 13.2%, 6 month periodic rate will be half of that, that is 6.6%. So if I want to find the present value of this 600, I'll take that 600, divide by 1 plus the periodic rate. Periodic rate is 6.6%. So 600 divided by 1.066. Look at this. 600 divided by 1.066. It will give me rupees 562.85. This is the amount that the FRA buyer will recover from the counterparty. That means the buyer of FRA made a gain, and the gain converted to its present value will be settled at that 3 month time. That means at the fixation date itself the FRA expires and is supposed to be settled that same day. You don't have to wait till the loan termination. Why? Because actual borrowing and lending is never going to happen. If actual borrowing and lending is not happening, if it is all about speculative gain and loss, whoever has to pay that 600 to the other party won't pay 600 but pay the present value of that 600. Won't pay after 6 months but pay it now. Because you have to pay it now, you have to pay not the entire saving of interest but the present value of that. So let us write down this whole thing along with the concluding point. Under speculative FRA contract that will be effective after 3 months from now, you will simply receive rupees 562.85 from the counterparty. Please write up this whole thing, and then I'll give you a shortcut approach to arrive at this calculation. Alright friends, I'm sure you have completed writing this whole thing. Now in exam, of course, you don't have to do all this. Simplest way to deal in examination is you find the difference between the market reference rate and the FRA rate. Market reference rate in our example was 13.2% minus the FRA rate, that was 12%. That difference would come to 1.2%. But that 1.2% is annualized rate. Convert that into periodic rate by multiplying the time factor of 6 by 12. So that difference came to 1.2% per annum. Periodic adjustment applied, it will be 0.6%. Apply that 0.6% on the notional principal of 1 lakh. 1 lakh into 0.6%, you get 600 one shot. That becomes your numerator. And you have to divide it by this factor, that is 1 plus the periodic MRR rate. So 1 plus the time adjusted MRR becomes the denominator. So basically that becomes a factor for finding the present value. Now how would you present that using a shorter approach? We can call it as a formula. Settlement amount. Please take note of this formula over here, where we are saying RR is the reference rate, FR is the FRA rate, N is the notional principal, T is the time involved, and 1 plus reference rate, which is time adjusted. We just make the computation. When we apply these calculations, look at this, 13.2% minus 12%, that difference came to 1.2%. 1.2% into time adjusted 6 by 12. So that became 0.6%. 0.6% applied on 1 lakh becomes 600 divided by 1 plus the time adjusted rate. So 1 plus time adjusted rate becomes a factor for discounting. So it is 600 divided by 1.066. It gives you the settlement amount directly. So I would want you to take note of this whole thing and then we move ahead. Alright friends, I am sure you have completed this, and now let us take up another example to deal with this. NJ Limited has bought 3 by 9 rupees 60 crore FRA at 9.2%. So somebody has bought FRA, means simple thing is agreed to borrow at FRA rate. What is that FRA rate? 9.2%. This is not a periodic rate, this is the annualized rate. Keep in mind, rates are always annualized on the fixing date. So basically 3 by 9 FRA means loan will start after 3 months. So after 3 months it is the fixing date, right? On the fixing date, the reference rate, that is MRR, turns out to be as follows. So you have been given 3-month MRR, 6-month MRR, 9-month MRR. Use your simple common sense, which is the relevant MRR for you. Relevant MRR for you is not 3 month, is not even 9 month, it is 6 month. Why? Because after 3 months, the rate that applies for the next 6 months is the MRR that you have to follow. Other MRRs are not relevant because they are not matching with your loan period. Your loan period is 3 by 9 FRA, means after 3 months you will borrow for a period of 6 months. That means you want to borrow for 6 months. So on the fixation date, that is after 3 months. So the date after 3 months is the fixation date. So basically, if you imagine again that timeline, 0, 3 month, 9 month. 0 is the date at which you enter into FRA. That is the FRA contract date or agreement date. That day you have agreed for that FRA of 9.2%. That day we did not know what will be the MRRs prevailing in future, that is after 3 months. So from that day, after entering into FRA, your waiting period starts. So you have entered into 3 by 9 FRA, means you agreed to borrow after 9 months for a period of 6 months. So 3 months gone. Now you are at the fixing date. You can call it fixing date, fixation date. You can call it settlement date also, because actually FRA gets settled at that date. Or FRA also expires at that date. So FRA expiration date is also the same. So FRA expiration date, settlement date, fixation date, all are same. In our case, that fixation date had given you 3 reference rate. Our relevant reference rate is the 6-month rate, which is 9.6% per annum. Now simple thing, 9.6% is the reference rate, that is market reference rate, but you agreed to borrow at 9.2%. So you have definitely saved how much? 9.6 minus 9.2, you have saved 0.4%. 0.4% applied on the notional principal of rupees 60 crore. So rupees 60 crore into 0.4% into 6 by 12, that will be your effective savings, but divide by 1 plus the time adjusted rate, and that time adjusted rate that you consider for discounting will not be the FRA rate but the market reference rate, which will be this 6-month rate. So 9.6% is per annum rate, adjusted for 6 months, that is periodic rate, will be 6 by 12, that is half of 9.6. Half of 9.6 is 4.8. So 4.8% added to 1. So the factor will become 1.048. So I know the denominator. What will be the numerator? Rupees 60 crores into 0.4% into 6 by 12. That will be the numerator. And as I said, 1.048 will be the denominator. You get the settlement amount instantly. If your logic is clear, if your understanding is clear, computing this settlement amount will be a task of not more than 20 to 30 seconds. You should just know what to calculate and how to calculate. Your understanding and your clarity is very, very important over here. So initially at the time of learning, you go for repetitions, multiple repetitions. This particular video, if needed, you can watch it multiple times. but make sure that the concepts are clear. Once you get that clarity, believe me, 15-20 seconds you'll crack such questions. So let's look into how to present the solution over here. In your solution, you just write up that formula for settlement amount and define the variables, substitute the values. I've already explained to you this whole thing. So look at this, 60 crore into 0.4% will give you 24 lakhs, into 6 by 12, that is half of that will become 12 lakhs, divided by 1.048, you convert 12 lakhs into present value, that comes to 11,45,038. So please write up this calculation quickly and then I take you ahead. Alright friends, once you have completed this, let me take you ahead to the next and last question in this category. I have given a similar example on screen. I am not going to solve it. What you do is, you take around say 2 minutes time. There are two different cases given. As I told you, if you are smart enough, each case you can handle in 15-20 seconds. So within 30-40 seconds you actually should solve this question, but I am giving you still say 2 minutes time to handle it. After a couple of minutes I will display the solution. So in case you need more time, you can pause the video and extend your time, but I will suggest you to complete this under 1 minute, both cases. So I'm not going to even read the question for you. You read, you understand, you solve it. I'm giving you 2 minutes time and your time starts now. Alright friends, 2 minutes time given to you is over. So the settlement amount for the first part comes to the present value of 4,50,000, that comes to rupees 4,39,453. In case you need to write it down, quickly write it up and then I take you ahead.